Today's guest is Elvi Gorshkov, Ayurvedic Health Counselor who guides individuals and families on their own Ayurvedic journeys, empowering others to take charge of their health. She is also a certified Completion Process Practitioner, guiding others through a profound healing experience that addresses the root cause of emotional and physical challenges. So, welcome, Elvi.
Hello, thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be
It's
here with you.
nice to have you here. As I mentioned to you before, I'm very interested in the different healing modalities that we have at our disposal in terms of through conventional medication, conventional medicine, and having experiences where we sometimes realize that things work and sometimes they don't work. And when we're on that
That's
path,
true.
of of healing, it requires us, I think, to take charge of our own personal health and to regroup, to look at more of what other methods have been using for many years, thousands of years, that have helped people and assisted them. And so, like yourself, I think I've read your bio, which is very interesting. You've gone through somewhat of a similar journey of going through conventional medicine, and changing and shifting towards different areas. Maybe you could just touch a little bit upon that, of how that came about.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it all. Yeah, my journey with Ayurveda has started with my own healing journey, and going back from the childhood, I had a lot of health issues, in particular with my digestive system. And as far as I remember myself, I've spent years, like months, in hospitals, and nobody could tell what's going on with me. Why am I suffering? Why do I have pain? And it lasted through adulthood until I finally realized that traditional systems can help me, and I had to look for alternatives. And they are the word alternative medicine, right? Although I don't like to call it alternative. It's more of a holistic approach. So Ayurveda was one of the things that really helped me in healing myself. And it's such a beautiful and vast system that I find that I've been studying it for the last, I think, 6.5, 7 years. And the more you study it, the less you feel like it's so vast, it's so nuanced, it's so rich. But at the same time, it's quite intuitive, because the essence of it is just understanding yourself, connecting to your own nature, understanding how your body works, understanding how you interact with the external world and the nature, recognizing forces you're interacting with, and just knowing how it impacts you. So in a way, it's quite simple and intuitive once you get to know the basics, right?
Yeah.
And so when I have found Ayurveda 6 years ago for me, and I have started to implement some of the basics and just recognize, okay, what elements and my body is made up of, and like what food would benefit me, and not the more one-size-fits-all traditional approaches to, okay, if you're on this diet, you'll heal all sorts of diseases, but it's more of a very unique approach to just very unique institution. I realized that, okay, this is the key. The key to healing is not to create standardized approaches to lifestyle, but look at the person as a very unique being, right? Based on where he is in his life, like life stage, or where he is geographically, what kind of forces are impacting him, etc. So there are so many things at play that it's important to account all of them when you're creating a healing protocol.
Yeah. It's interesting
Yeah.
because when we look at a human being, we categorize people on a grand scale of male, female, or anything that a person chooses. And thereafter,
Yeah.
we can go then break down from those specific parts, and then people then look to minimize the characteristics of things so that we can hook into the conventional ways of medicine, so that we take a pill
Yeah.
that not cures, but just covers or masks many things. And then it encompasses so many different things, as opposed to finding or zoning in and having the patience to find the specificity of a specific ailment or a specific emotion attached to that physical ailment. And I know, again, for myself, I just wanted to touch upon the fact that I remember going to the doctor when I was in my mid-20s and having sinus infections consistently and not knowing the
Right.
root cause of it. And of course, as the human being, we're trying to hook into something and saying, it's from that, it's from that, it's from that. And then never really
Right.
getting to the
Right. Right.
understanding. And then after that particular incident, or for many years and being on antibiotics, the doctor said to me, he said, why don't you try acupuncture? And so
Mhm.
first off, my first reaction is, why didn't you tell me that sooner, as opposed to waiting so many years to have me taking these medications? And then after that, I was on my way to feeling and understanding the energy body and understanding how I was healing to some degree. And so for yourself, as you mentioned, you know, it starts off in childhood. It starts off in some type of event in our lives, a healing crisis that forces us
Yep.
either to
Yep.
remain or to change. So what is,
Yep.
if you had to describe let's say to a child, it's very simple. What is the basic principle
Mhm.
of Ayurvedic medicine? Like, what's the basic idea of how it operates?
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let me try that. Um, so one of the main principles is that Ayurveda looks into the world through elements. So if you look at the very core, if you break down anything you're dealing with, let's say, I don't know, this notebook, if you start breaking it down and looking at like the smallest particle of what it's made of, you will see that everything is made of five elements. And I'll keep it simple, four elements, right? So we'll have water, air, fire, and earth. And knowing what it's made of, you will know the qualities of it. Okay, this is very stable, this is very dense, right? This is very dry. And the same comes to our bodies, and same comes to anything we are interacting with. Sometimes we do something in life that increases one element or another. For example, we are in a very hot weather in a dry climate. So what does it do? It removes water from our body and we become very dry. And that over a long time can create certain issues. So how do we balance it? So we need to bring water elements into our body and maybe drink more, maybe spray yourself with water, maybe take in foods that are very hydrating, right? So the same way comes, the same view can be applied to pretty much anything in your life. So if you have certain symptom, if your belly ache, for example, right? You need to look at the qualities of that ache. Is it aches because you're gassy, or is it aches because there's something burning? And based on knowledge, based on that knowledge, right? How, like you can understand, okay, maybe it's a little bit too much fire in your belly, or maybe a little bit too much air in your belly. And based on that, you start applying a medicine. It's through food, through herbs, through certain practices.
Yeah.
And it helps heal, and it helps to find you like your core and your balanced state of being.
Yeah, now it's interesting when go ahead. I'm sorry.
Is this simple enough?
Yeah, no, very simple, very interesting. Yeah, it's I studied Chinese medicine and the
Yeah.
cycle, the destruction cycle, the mother, I think it's mother daughter, mother son, the one that helps assists each other, the one that destroys one another, and so it's interesting because it's people don't realize how we're programmed, first of all, to live a certain way, but we're also programmed to eat a certain way and to maintain the same patterns because we're comforted by those patterns. But as you
Yeah.
say, you know, we have to take, I guess, inventory on what's going on at what stage does it manifest in our system? Like, does it start off at a softer manifestation that becomes more chronic? And is it more difficult to shift any of the ailments, just like other modalities?
Yeah, so for sure. So first of all, we have our unique setup of elements, right? It's almost like genetic setups, and it's predefined preconceptually. So you are already in utero, right? Pre-birth, you already have a certain constitution. And then based on environment you are birthed into and where you grow up and what food you eat, it's changing, right? And depending how far it takes you from your original state of constitution, from your original constitution, you'll start developing certain diseases. The longer it takes to develop, right, the longer you accumulate this imbalanced state of your, I'll call them elements for now, the more difficult it is to treat, to reverse it back. Right? And usually there are certain systems. So all the diseases, according to Ayurveda, start within the digestive system. So our digestive tract is a headquarter for all the I guess it's now time to bring the doshas in play, right? So doshas are those energetic combinations of elements, very known, right, in Ayurveda, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So they headquartered in your belly. And when you start accumulating excess of one element or do something that brings you in balance, they first accumulate in your digestive tract. Okay. And the very first system starts in digestive tract. And if you don't at that point catch it, it will start accumulating and eventually it spills out in your other systems. So the longer it spills out and the more it interacts with other systems, the more difficult it becomes to treat it. And so therefore, most of Ayurvedic treatments always, regardless of what it is you're dealing with, always addressing the digestive tract, because you want to address the root cause where it starts to make sure that from the beginning, right, you're not creating more of an imbalance.
Right. Yeah, the dashas themselves are also, I guess, are they implied in terms of personalities, of if a person's a fire or more water or more
Yes. So Ayurveda looks at those energetics, not just on a physical level, but also on emotional level. The spiritual, emotional, mind, bodies, they all are interconnected, right? And so when you look at those elements, yes, you can describe it in terms of certain physical qualities. For example, let's look at Pitta. Pitta is predominantly fire element, right? And so when you look at fire, what do you feel? Like you feel heat, you feel sharpness, right? You feel directness, you feel brightness, right?
Yeah.
And it's a force that transformative force. So when you look at a person, right, that has a lot of pitta, you will see some sharpness, like maybe sharp elbows, sharper features of the face, and then the look will be very intense, and the speech will be very direct, very straightforward. And those are the people that take information quickly, transform it, right? They're strong leaders, they can articulate really well. They can be a little bit harsh if pitta goes out of balance, right? Yes. The more you have, like the harsher you become. Intensity, hardworking, like get things done. If you look at the emotional side of it, right? This is some of your heating emotions like anger, maybe criticism, judgmentality, perfectionism. So yes, when you look at different dosha, you can recognize them based on just physical appearance, right, as well as some emotional characteristics of how a person is coming off in interactions.
Yeah, people look at astrology, and obviously we look at the person as a sign, but we also look at it as an element as well, the combination. And then interesting, sometimes people look at other people and say, "Oh, you're this particular sign," and some people could cast a negative word about a specific, characteristic or trait of a sign or somebody. So sometimes I guess people, do they want to be a specific element, or when they hear a certain element about themselves, are people more taken back or closed off about denying that aspect of themselves? Because I think a lot of times people, not that a person takes offense to a reading or a diagnosis, but in some capacity people do. When people hear somebody say something that makes them too soft, I should be firmer. If a person's too strong, I should be softer. So I think the first battle is within ourselves of acceptance of who we are, and to know that we are what we are, and the acceptance of it is the important aspect of it, and to work with that, correct? Or
Well, absolutely. Yes, it's very relevant. And I'm thinking back to my own experience when I have started exploring myself through doshic elements. I found out that I have certain amount of kapha element, and kapha is earth and water. It's something that makes you soft and gentle and stable. But somehow, to me, I had a little bit of resistance because kapha is also a little bit slower in terms of thinking patterns. They're a little slower, and so I have like like a why
yeah,
or
yeah,
how do I minimize it? But then I realized, well, first of all, we have all three doshas, right? We have to be in acceptance of them, and second of all, there are both sides, and you have to understand both sides of any planet, any element, and any dosha, right? And kapha, I realized, is the one that gives you so much stability in life. It is like really grounding, and this is something that, in fact, connected me at first place to the nature, to the animals, to plants, and gave me that interest to explore that area. That eventually, when I saw that, I became much more accepting on my own nature. And definitely, it comes like this knowledge gives you a lot of acceptance. The more you know and understand. Similarly, like when you work with certain emotions, right? We have a tendency to suppress some of our aspects that we think will not be accepted by let's say, by society, right?
yes, yes,
So if I'm shy and I don't want to be perceived shy, I'm gonna deny this aspect, and I'll try to appear as bold as I possibly can, right?
right, right.
And but then within yourself, it's going to create a lot of conflict because it's not going anywhere. It's just within you, and kind of feels like it's like abundant part of you that will scream and cry every time it has a chance. And as soon as you actually give it attention and understand why, for example, why it's shy, what happened to you in a childhood, and you accept it and integrate it, your life changes and you feel much more stable, much more empowered.
Does a person when they have a session, a treatment, and work with a practitioner like yourself, do they first off, I mean, you first have you can get an idea looking at the person. You could read the energy and feel what the person is about based upon the color of the skin, possibly the eyes, the temperament.
Yes,
But
yes,
also,
yes,
do they have to answer questions, a questionnaire to answer what
yes,
aspect of dasha they
yeah,
belong to? Okay, it's
yeah.
interesting.
The Ayurvedic intake is quite comprehensive, and it does require collecting as much information as possible because, as I mentioned, we have some predefined constitution, but over time it changes.
I was gonna ask you.
And for me, in order to understand where you are right now versus what's your original state, requires some digging. It's like a detective work. So yes, I send a lot of questions that I ask people to answer, and they include questions about their system function. So how was your appetite now versus how was your appetite when you were a child, and all sorts of tendencies over your lifetime. And then, yes, I do physical assessment looking at your bone width and skin density, intensity of your speech, etc., etc. If it's in person, it's maybe I can even assess through the smell from your body, right? A lot of things give a lot of information, yes. And then all this information is collected, and based on all this information, I can identify, was it like part of your constitution, or is it something that happened over the lifetime because of the particular lifestyle or something that happened to you? And then based on symptom, we can define which dosha is played most and what needs to be done in order to balance and bring you back to your more centered self.
Yeah,
But intake takes about 2 hours. Yes,
interesting.
the initial.
You brought up the point of shifting or people's dashas changing throughout their lives. That was something that I was going to ask you about. And, you know,
Yes.
I watch people who do face reading, and people's faces shift and change. Their structure changes, and they're also then associated more with a specific element or a specific personality, like a Venus or Jupiter, or different aspects of who they are. And you know, when you're doing the diagnosis itself, do you see the potential for a person's shift based upon the reading itself of who they are? Some people's dasha is more stubborn to change or shift, as opposed to like water being more flowing or fire being more resistant, or are there different?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. So doshas change not even throughout life, but every hour, like throughout the day. We have cycles of the day, so natural cycles, right? And it's very important to know those cycles because this is how our doshas operate. And we usually break down days for vata time, pitta time, kapha time, as well as night, vata time, pitta, kapha time. And therefore, knowing that it will help you when it's best to go to sleep, when it's best to wake up based on your own constitution, etc. And yes, as we grow, like when we are born as children, we have much more earth and water, which is kapha. We are like puffy and like sweet, and children even have this kapha smell, which is a little sweet, like a bakery, right? And when we grow, they're very connected to earth, very connected to their bodies. But as they grow, they shift into the pitta time. This is the transformation, the action, the work starts, the studying starts, a lot of processes are getting activated, right? So all from puberty through 50, 60, depending on your gender, and it's quite individual, right? You go through the pitta time when you're very like, get things done. And then eventually you move into vata time, which is air and ether, which is more subtle, very subtle elements. So you start thinning out, and vata is connecting you to spirituality. So it's more likely for people to open up their top chakras, crown chakras, and be much more connected to spirituality at the certain age because of how the doshas interplay. And they generally become much thinner, much drier as it preparing to, leave the physical world and go into another dimension, right? It's a natural cycle.
Right.
Yes. And therefore Ayurveda has a lot of anti-aging protocols to balance out this element of the dosha, vata dosha, to help you dry less quickly and to help you like go through this period with a bit of peace and comfort,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
should say. Yeah. But to answer the other question, definitely based on the doshic at play, I will know how people will respond to the protocols, and I have to adjust accordingly.
Right.
So, for example, people with a lot of air is very mobile element, right? And usually these people have a lot of thoughts and they jump from project to project. They have difficulties finishing things. Usually a lot of creativity. I'm talking about like extreme versions. It's
Right.
just an example, right? Creativity. And so if you give them a lot of information and a lot of things to do, more than 3 sometimes, they get lost. It's like they get overwhelmed and and they'll never come back. They'll be like, they're going to be even in a worse state than they were before.
Yeah.
If it's, for example, fire, people that they transform a lot of information, like processes, they like to be organized, very structured. The more you give, the better. And they will be like very on top of everything and doing it even before the time. And like, but the key here is not to increase the intensity, because like fiery people have a tendency to make things with intensity. So when I give my recommendations, I want to make sure, okay, I'll with a little bit of enough information to keep them challenged and interested, but also not to make their work too intense. And then with kapha, which is earth and water element, it's a more stable, more slowest element. And it takes the longest time for them to implement changes. And it requires a bit of like shaking and nudging, a little bit of reminding a little more, and doing things that are very exciting in order to get them even started.
Right.
So yes, based on what I see in people, I adjust my recommendations to make it a little bit more applicable, relevant, and interesting.
Would that be the most difficult dasha to work with?
Well, there is no difficult. It's hard to tell.
Okay,
It's
each person is different.
really difficult to say. Each person is different, and the doshas they express themselves differently. Some people have them more on emotional side, some people have them more on physical side. It's just, I will have to adjust recommendation based on where I find the axis of that dosha. Like if it's in a physical body, maybe I'll include certain exercises, right, to move things through. If it's emotional, then it's slightly different practices.
Yeah. When you're working with a client, and I assume, because I could see your intuition would take over in many aspects, is it through sight? Is it through the senses itself? Like you mentioned smell, but again, some people would have that sense as a practitioner to begin with. Does your intuition come to
Right,
play in terms of
for sure.
seeing things?
Yes, for sure. Well, you engage all senses because you take in information through your all senses. So you definitely engage all senses. But intuition is something, is almost like a muscle. You always have it, but
Yes.
I am learning over time to learn more and more and more. And I realize what a helpful sense it is to have this intuition. I try not to only rely on intuition. I try to also fact check with other aspects. So if I feel something, I'll maybe ask additional questions, or I'll collect some additional information to support my intuition. But yes, it's definitely a very powerful tool, and it's very important in this type of work because you create the subtle connection with the person. And every time you work with someone, you're attuning to the person, and very often you start feeling the same thing that person feels, especially in the sessions. And just the key is to catch it and to understand what's yours and what comes from another person.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, the transference of one's
That's
resonance
right.
with someone else in terms of
Yeah.
mirroring their own specific emotions at a specific time. Because I know if I do a reading, I do an Akashic record reading, there are times when I either see a resonance of my own issue that's actually resonating with the other person's issue. And sometimes I guess it causes a little interference, but then you recognize that you could separate the two, which is what I'm sure you're able to
Yeah.
do. I wanted to touch upon ether.
Absolutely.
The ether itself, is there a
Yeah.
dasha for ether? Is there a specific
So
element?
yeah. Yeah, there are 5 elements. I didn't mention ether because it's the most confusing and I wanted to keep it simple. But ether is the fifth element. There are 5 elements in Ayurveda that we are looking at. And ether is an element of, it's the most expansive element, and it kind of provides the platform for all other elements to exist. This is like, I look at it almost like this is the source, right?
Yeah,
This is the source, and in that source, everything else is created. But when you look, ether can be, when you look at the person, there is a way to recognize it in a person, and it has this expansiveness, and it's a very subtle element. And usually people that have strong intuition into this holistic or esoteric work, they have quite a lot of ether element in their either constitution or current state of the bodies.
yeah, I find that interesting because I know for myself, the Akashic records are the space between
Yeah,
space. It's the holographic
exactly.
information that resonates from us to a certain fifth dimension area, and we receive that information. I know myself sometimes not leaving the body, but the ability to come out of the body in terms of feeling outside of myself. So I know that space, I know that feeling of where that's at. And specifically through, I would
Yeah.
say, stresses and traumas, I assume a lot of people can be in that state and not recognize that that's where they're at. You know?
Exactly. And in fact, I have spent a few weeks at the retreat working as a volunteer, and the retreat was with a focus on healing emotional trauma. And I have noticed, and through my practice, and actually through my own experience, yes, when we have certain traumas and it's so painful and unbearable, the part of us, part of our consciousness almost splits from your body, and it starts existing in a different area. And the more traumatic events you had, or the stronger the traumatic event
Yeah.
you experienced in your life, the bigger parts of your consciousness are like out of your body. And at some point, I realized that I've existed in this out of body experience. And one of the things why I came to Ayurveda, because I realized how harmful I was in the practices that took me out of body. And I'm referring to actually spiritual practices.
Yeah.
So at some point of my life, when I found spiritual practices for me, it was like, okay, new horizon. This is what I need to exist for. And I went so deep and I went so far and I had such an enlightening experiences, but I didn't realize that by doing that, I'm actually abandoning my day-to-day life and abandoning my physical body. And at some point, I developed such a horrible symptoms. My body was screaming for attention. It was like a child, just come back to me. And eventually I had that realization, and I had to focus on much more being in myself with my pain sometime and doing things that much more grounding rather than sitting hours in meditation.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
most people think that the spiritual path is a journey upward completely, but without the grounding
right.
process, without keeping our feet on the ground and the masculine and
Yeah,
feminine in combination, it becomes just a runaway train that takes off out like a helium balloon that floats away from us. I mean, as I mentioned earlier for
exactly.
myself, I felt that myself during my traumas and stresses, like that soul loss, that fragmentation. So it was easier to always connect probably to that ether area
Yep.
because I was in that ether itself. And
Yeah.
the important part now is to be able for people to, I guess, maintain that connection, but also, as you said, the human experience so that we can be present for this
Yeah.
incarnation. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Continue to be here in this playground and explore through the body, right?
yeah,
It's definitely much easier to get a wider perspective. And I think that is why spiritual practices are often used as spiritual mechanisms, because you kind of pop out of your suffering and you look at things above and you're like, okay, we all one, we all connected, all
yeah.
good. I don't need to worry about it, right? And you constantly getting this perspective that takes you away from the problems. But in reality, it's pure coping and it doesn't solve what it is you are here for, right?
Well, I've experienced that in seeing many people or coming to some conclusion of thinking that people are spiritual or on a spiritual path, yet their own
Yeah.
ego-based issues really haven't been resolved, and therefore using spiritualism as a crutch or as a cover-up for their own
Right. Yeah.
in their vulnerabilities, which we all have. But I think remaining, as you said, grounding and I said combination, like you said, it's the balance. It's, I guess. So how does a person who is in that ether uh, dasha, how are they brought back down? How are they soothed to the ground? I mean, how does that take place in your practice?
So through Ayurveda, most of the grounding practices are those that connect you to the heavy elements, to earth and water,
Okay.
right? And it comes through food, so you start eating much heavier food, and heavier food are those that we call it a sweet taste. Things like grains, right? Whole grains, things like butter, oil. They are rich in earth and in water. They're very ground heavy, right?
Yes.
Something that you eat when you are, let's say, in a very cold environment. You wouldn't eat salad there, right? You would eat something that keeps you warm and grounded. Meat is very grounding. So at some point of my life, I had to start eating meat, even though it was out of my diet for a really long time, because it became necessary. What else? Some of the heavy, like dairy products as well, grounding. But you can definitely adjust it based on preference and especially dietary restrictions, but choosing food that's a little heavier and being on a nature, maybe walking barefoot, touching the earth with your feet, going into the natural water bodies, whether it's ocean, whether it's river, and really connecting to those elements. And one of the biggest things that's helping to ground you is oil. And in Ayurvedic practices, oil is used. You use a lot of oil in your food.
Yeah.
You use a lot of oil in your skin. And there is a therapy, body therapy, which is called Abhyanga. It's a warm oil massage. And in fact, I started to practice it a couple of years ago. So I'm giving those body warm oil massages here in my office. And but it's also something that can be applied daily. So you basically warm up a little bit of oil and start your day with applying oil through your entire body, and it creates protection layer. It nourishes your skin and makes it much more denser, and it grounds you immediately. It comes down your nervous system. You feel much more regulated, but it's on an energetic level as well. It creates like a layer of protection.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I was going to talk to you about something about that related to that. I was going to move on from this particular to the completion process practitioning that you're involved in.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and what you do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Completion process. Completion process is a really beautiful technique that has been developed by a spiritual teacher, Teal Swan. She is American. She resides in Utah, and she's a woman who went through a lot of traumatic experiences in her life and in her journey of healing. She has created this technique. Completion process is basically, you can call it somatic type of technique when you work with a person and you use current feeling or emotion or strong trigger to go deep into to when it was originated. And usually most of our strong emotions, feeling triggers very often originate in childhood traumas, and we are subconsciously not knowing and carrying it with us through the entire life. So this technique helps you to recover some of the original memories and provide healing experience. Basically, you almost like traveling in time and changing experience of what happened to you and how, not what happened to you, but how you took on what the situation,
Yeah.
and then from that on, when you come out of a session, you usually feel differently towards certain situation.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. I know for example, the inner child work and
Yes.
really going back to
Yes.
that trauma is an important aspect
Okay.
of
Yes. Yes, it's very similar to inner child work. It has certain steps that you need to go through from the beginning to the very end in order to provide this feeling of completion. At the end of each session, you really feel like you received a piece of like energetic life source back into your life. You usually feel much more energized and like you have completed something.
yeah, most people they don't want to they want permission. Sometimes they were told not to have permission by those that wounded them. And yet, when we get older and we seek to connect to that inner child, the practitioner themselves is
Right.
giving us the permission and the security to then go back and retrieve that part of ourselves that was wounded or traumatized. And interesting, I know, for example, my daughter
Yeah.
and the issues that we had, and I told him maybe if you go back and revisit that part of you, that child. And she said, "How do I do that?" Well, then I gave her a little meditation, and somehow or another, I think she found the inner child, through that vision and through that acceptance. And so I know how powerful this kind of work can be because you can see the shift. You can see the shift in people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm curious, how old is your daughter?
My daughter is 34.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're connecting now, and the interesting thing is how like your work is a process and not something that is not overnight per se. It's a process, right, of shifting and changing and reevaluating. And you look at relationships like mother and daughter, and
Mhm.
father and children, and how it all shifts into different energies and the patience and the timing that's necessary to allow something to happen or to occur. What would you say
Yeah, totally.
What would you say is do each person's process is obviously at a different pace in terms of nobody can say how long a person can heal from something, right? A person,
Yeah.
but when a person, do people ask like how long will this take, or how long is the process, or do
Yeah.
most people are patient, or how are they?
Yeah, I think our today's lifestyle made us quite impatient. Our attention span is quite short. And I find myself sometimes impatient. I'm like, I wish it could have been done faster. Those are modern tendencies, right?
Yeah,
And yes, as you said, it's very individual. You feel it gets better almost like after every session because you bring to the awareness something and you know yourself much better every time you go deep. It's almost like you're opening the channels of your subconscious and you bring it to the level of conscious. And it's very empowering just to know yourself. So you have less and less blind spots every time you do this work.
that's a good point.
But also, every trauma has a lot of layers.
Yeah,
And it's impossible to just go in and just heal at once. And I'm very skeptical to the modalities that promise you to provide one-time healing once and for all, because we are here to grow and constantly expand, and we are constantly growing and expanding at a new level. And at your each level, something else opens up for you that you're ready to heal now. And it's like onion peels, right? Like 5 years, I was ready to look just at this thing. Today, I'm looking at much more complex thing, and it feels like, oh my God, my life gets worse sometimes because of what I am dealing with. But in reality, when I look back, I see, okay, like 5 years ago, I wasn't ready to look at this. Now I am. And after I integrate certain aspects of me, I feel how much more empowered and what I'm able to accomplish and how less I hold myself back in whatever it is that I do, including sitting with you at this podcast, right? I don't think it would be possible for me 6 years ago. This level of exposure would be very intimidating and uncomfortable. So every little things, like I think it's important to keep a little like progress sheet, just to look back and compare yourself with how I was a year ago, or 2 years ago, or even 5 years ago, and what I have done with my life once I have started this process of looking into myself at a very deep level.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should give ourselves more, acknowledge ourselves in a higher level, or yeah, yeah, absolutely. Give ourselves a pat on the back for sure. Give yourself a pat on the back. I I look at what you just said. As soon as you said onion, I saw an onion. So I was thinking about the onion of people don't realize how long something has gone on. People don't realize the
Yeah.
intensity that closed that layer of that onion, and how then it takes that much to open it up again and to remove it. So
Yeah.
if somebody were interested in reaching out to you, um, like your website, maybe you could share that with the audience.
Absolutely. I'll share my website with you. It is boskeayurveda.com. I'm active on social media. I have Instagram account, I have YouTube account, and I'll share the links with you happily.
Yeah, and is there any new work that you're investigating, or is there anything you're looking to expand upon, or are you just continuing building the practice that you're doing now?
Well, I'm continuing building the practice. Ayurveda is a very vast system, like it's the learning never ending. So I continue to take additional courses, and as well as completion process is beautiful technique which can be expanded and taken to a next level. Um, yes, so for now, I am trying to get a little more depth into existing practices before moving on to something else.
Yeah, and if you could leave the audience with like a message about the work you're doing, or something that relates to the work we've spoken about.
Yeah. Uh, like an elevator speech type of thing.
Well, I guess you could
Motivational,
share a message.
motivational.
Yeah, a little, motivational message of the work you do and how it ties into life itself, or whatever you'd like to
Okay.
say based on that.
Yeah. Through the years that I have worked in the field of natural medicine and holistic healing, I learned that we have so much wisdom within us. And the key is to find that wisdom within you and not try and rely on external sources. Yes, it's beautiful to use external sources as tools, but the true wisdom and knowledge is within your body, as within your physical and within your emotional body. And true healing goes when you connect to your either own body or your own feelings and emotions. This is where you find the truth about yourself. Yes. So I would love to encourage everyone to go deep in the relationship with yourself.
That's an excellent message, because I find myself, I know myself as going inward, but I also know myself as going outward to escape the emotions that I don't want to deal with. And I think we all have to catch ourselves at that midpoint and recognize,
Yeah.
turn back. You're going up the road that's not going to be safe or for your best interest, your health wise and emotions. So that's a great message. So, all right, Elvi, I want to thank you for joining me and sharing this wonderful and inspiring information. I'm inspired, and I'm sure the people who listen to this will be, and hopefully they'll contact you if they're interested in doing this work.
Thank you, Adam. It was my pleasure. I had a lot of fun speaking with you.
Yeah. Same here. Okay.